All right, let's get down to it. How much money do storage facilities actually make? If you're going to go out and invest or buy a storage facility, how much do they make? What is the profit and how does that work? This video, we're going to talk all about that. Small, medium, large facilities, the components, but we're going to get down to the numbers and we're going to go through what you should expect as far as revenue and profit goes. But before I jump into that, please like and subscribe because that is the currency of YouTube. That's how you help me out. That's how we keep producing this content, and it shows us that you're liking what you're seeing and hearing, and we'll make more of it. Thank you. So there is a lot of variables when we're talking about how much storage facilities make. And I've got a bunch of examples, and I'm going to go through a lot of scenarios so you can see what the net profit would look like under different types of facilities: location, charge, size. So you can have a better understanding when you're going out into the market and you're looking at facilities, how much does that thing make? And it can be all over the board, so we're going to keep focused. Obviously, I can't take into account every single variable. I can't even try to do that because that would be way too many. One of the parts I'm leaving out is financing. The reason I'm leaving it out is that depends on a lot of factors. That depends on interest rates. That depends on where things are going, what the economy is doing, and that changes all the time. I'm leaving that part out, and we're just talking about how much it makes before you pay the loan. Simple math can show you what your net profit after your loan will amount to. Let's get to it. I break these things down into three categories, okay? I'm breaking them down into small, medium, and large. To give you context to what that means, in self-storage, everything is done by square footage. Everything. We say a small facility, under 50,000 square feet is about right. Medium, 50 to 100,000 square feet, and the large ones are 100,000+ square feet. This can vary all over the place. You could have a 5,000 square foot facility, a 20,000 square foot facility, a 150,000 square foot facility. I'm going to give three examples of revenue associated with a certain size and the expense ratios that can be expected and what that looks like as far as net profit goes or how much you would make. If we're looking at a small facility, let's say it's 20,000 square feet, okay? At that facility, you can charge on that 20,000 square feet roughly, let's say 50 cents a square foot, okay? At that, you're going to make about $120,000 a year. $120,000 in gross income. Now, the real question is expense ratios. There's two ways to go about it, but I'm going to go the standard way to start out. Generally speaking, the smaller the facility is, the larger the expense ratio, percentage of income that you need to cover those expenses are. Why? Because there's not as much revenue. So generally, it's 40 to 50% of expense, maybe even more sometimes. The big trend, and what I suggest, and most people are going towards, is automation of small facilities. That's the reason why. That expense ratio is just so large. And automation, you can take out a lot of the expenses that are involved with people manually managing those assets. That is really the way to make small facilities work. But we're going to keep and show you how you may be underwriting a small facility, and you may be looking at it at a 45% expense ratio. At 120,000 gross revenue, that leaves you with roughly $54,000 in expenses. That gives you $66,000 in profit. Now, small facilities, they can actually be even cheaper than 50 cents a square foot. You can see these in third, fourth tier markets at 30 cents, making a lot less money. But that should give you an example right there of what that may look like. Now, the three categories I go into as far as revenue per square foot is 50 cents, $1 a square foot, and $2. This is generally associated with marketplaces. The bigger the markets go, the higher density the population, the higher demand, and the higher the charge are. So if you are charging $1 a square foot on 20,000 square feet, you're gonna make around $240,000. That leaves you with about $100,000 in expenses. So you should be expecting $130,000 right around there to be making at $1 a square foot. The key for this is to lower that expense ratio. You can see it takes a lot out of that gross revenue. And with small facilities, that's the name of the game. Because the next example at $2 a square foot is actually kind of uncommon when you're dealing with small facilities. That takes you all the way up to $480,000. So with a $215,000, $16,000 expense ratio on that, you're left over with $264,000. That is generally not what we see, though, in small facilities, that $2 a square foot charge. The reason we use square feet and the reason we charge on a per square foot basis is because in storage facilities, size ranges all over the place. I may have 20 by 20s and 5 by 5s. A 5 by 5, I may get $2.50 a square foot, but a 20 by 20, I may get 20 cents a square foot, depending on the market and the demand. So we want to even out. I'm targeting all the square footage to even out above a certain point so I can measure it, look at the upside and the ability to move those rents up overall. That's the game we play. Now, we're going to go up a size and talk about that. In medium facilities, these can still be automated. They're not traditionally, but they can be. The reason being is when you're dealing with 50 to 100,000 square feet, which I'm going to use a middle ground around 80,000 square feet. So if you think traditional drive-up storage, 5 acres gives you around 80,000 square feet. Let's say that's around 600 doors. Now, in this facility that you have, that's a lot of people coming in and out. That's a bigger property. There's usually on-site management, even if you co-manage it with streamlined technology that allows for automation. There still needs to normally be work. You can lower your employee count down, right, through automation. But because it's bigger, the expense ratio is lower. 35% expense ratio is what I underwrite at. And that's probably what you should be underwriting at too. Okay, so we're sticking with the 35% expense ratio. It may be higher and lower when you're looking at it and underwriting. The real key for me, though, is what my expense ratio is. And that's what I understand and I know, and that's how I underwrite. Now, if I'm looking at an 80,000 square foot facility and the seller says that they have an expense ratio of 20%, that's laughable. I'm not going to underwrite it at that because that creates their cap rate, which is based upon a percentage of what you'll make off what you're paying for it. It inflates the value of that because if you take all of that expense, that goes to net profit, which changes how much you'll make. And so you can take a facility and by lowering that expense ratio, you can add hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars onto the value of it by artificially lowering that expense ratio. We see it all the time. I was working with a facility that a broker took to market. On that facility, their expense ratio was 10%. They included no labor, in which they had labor. Their taxes hadn't readjusted for the new price, which was a 100% increase in the total tax. They didn't include labor, taxes, and a lot of other things that weren't included that. When you include it all in, it was 35%. They had all these people that were trying to get this facility. They were looking at it. After we showed them how to underwrite it, they went back, added in 35%. It dropped it by $1.5 million, and then the seller took it off the market and didn't want to sell it anymore. So you need to make sure that you don't get trapped buying something at an expense ratio that is artificially low. All right. If we're dealing with 80,000 square feet and you're charging 50 cents a square foot, you're going to make around $480,000 to $500,000. You're going to have about $170,000 worth of expenses associated with that. That gives you a net profit of $315,000, let's say, or $300,000+. This is great cash flow. The margins on these you can make, and they can be very large. That's why buying them right is so important, though, because that's where you can get trapped. Now, I'm going to jump past $1. We're going to go all the way up to $2. We find this much more in first-tier markets, coastal, expensive markets. Then on 80,000 square feet, you're talking almost $2 million at that point. You have to understand, though, we're also including things like insurance. That can up the level of revenue per square foot. I'm not going to get into too much detail about that. We have other videos for that. At $2 million, though, your expense ratio starts to lower because most of those expenses are fixed. Just because I added on 20,000 square feet doesn't mean I need another person. It doesn't necessarily mean our utilities are skyrocketing or anything else. That's the benefit of scale. That's the benefit of going better. So off that $2 million, you're probably going to make, 1.3, maybe $4 million if you're maximizing it. And that's kind of why we left the small ones and got into the big ones. The expense ratio helped us. It gave us scale, more revenue to play with and reinvest. And it also diluted risk through unit numbers. All right, everybody. The Big Berthas. These are the big boys, the 100,000+ square feet. We like these. We have a lot of them. 100,000 square feet, you're typically seeing 50-cent revenues in much smaller markets. That is a lot of square footage at a really low rate. The thing is, you can still make good money. You can make $800,000 off 130,000 square feet with $250,000 worth of expenses. You're going to make $600,000 off of that. But the power is that revenue being pushed upwards. You go up to $1, you're already at 1.5 million in gross revenue. Once again, at this size, your actual expense ratio starts to shrink. Go up to $2. At $2, you're already over $3 million in revenue. That gives you a net profit of 2.3 million off of that. Once again, this is before financing because of all those reasons. But your expense ratio starts to lower. So the thing you need to remember is middle ground facilities, they usually need some type of automation plus management. They tend to have around a 35% expense ratio. Smaller facilities, the expense ratio is higher. If you can get it lower, that's great, but you want to underwrite it at a higher because when you lower it and automate it, you want that profit. That's how you make these small facilities so profitable. I'm buying it at a 45% expense ratio, but I'm running it at a 35%, and I'm taking the rents that were at 50 cents, generating 120,000. I'm taking them to $1, that's 240,000, and dropping my expenses down from 100,000 to 50,000. You just added a lot of money to that facility and a lot of revenue into your pocket, a lot of cash flow. The big ones, this is much more professional management. This is lower expense ratio, but it's higher intensity on what you need to do as far as dynamic pricing, modeling out units, playing with demand, skilled set marketing to get people in, value presentation, offering, all of that, because you're trying to get that per unit price up. At the end of the day, no matter what market you're in, if you're in a 50 cents a square foot market or a $2 a square foot market, the goal is to find the opportunity at the lower revenue per square foot and get that revenue up. I also combine this with expansions. I may buy at a low revenue per square foot and vacant land that I can up the revenue and expand the facility, increasing the facility's size. Those are home runs. I love those types of assets. No matter how you do it though, it's all determined by demand. Demand determines everything. So you may be asking, how do I get that increase? What do I do? We have a great video. It's how to double a self-storage facility's value. We go under all of this, supply, demand, and the things that you need to do to increase their revenue. Check it out and all the other videos on making self-storage a profitable, wealth-creating venture for you.